Hi guys, my name is Zoe Cross, and on today's episode of Into the Oasis, we are joined by Dr. Arie Kruglanski. And then with me today, I have
Hi, my name is Elena Akers, and I'm a researcher at START.
awesome. Uh, Dr. Kruglanski is a distinguished university professor of psychology at the University of Maryland and a co-founder of the National Consortium for the Study of Terrorism and Responses to Terrorism, or START as we know it. And over the course of his incredible career, he's pioneered research on human motivation, decision making, and what drives individuals to embrace extremist ideologies, coining concepts like the quest for significance and need for closure that have reshaped how scholars and policymakers alike understand radical behavior. He's also my teacher for Psych 389T, the Psychology of Terrorism, which was such a great course. And from working with global counterterrorism agencies to shaping the very way we talk about radicalization, his work blends rigorous science with real-world input. Whether you're new to the field or deep in the weeds of terrorism studies, this conversation is for you. We're diving into what really motivates extremism, what can be done to stop it, and what psychology has to say about some of the most urgent threats facing the world today. Dr. Kruglanski, welcome to Into the Oasis.
It's a pleasure to be with you, Zoe.
Thank you. So let's start at the beginning to kick this off. You've spent decades studying psychology behind human motivation. What drew you to extremism and terrorism as a research focus?
Prior to my interest in terrorism, I was interested in general social psychological problems, studying them in the laboratory with the university students as participants. I was interested in closed-mindedness. I was interested in how people form opinions, how they form beliefs, how this is different from scientific thinking, all kinds of general issues about social psychology, group psychology, and other topics that are kind of mainstay of the field of psychology. But after 9/11, something happened, and our world was shaken, and things were never the same again. At that point, the National Academies of Science proposed to President George W. Bush their services in understanding terrorism. And the president responded affirmatively. He was interested in the input of the scientific community. And as a consequence, the National Academies of Science established panels in the various scientific disciplines: chemistry, food disciplines, economics, uh, material industries, engineering, all the different disciplines of science offered their services to deepen understanding of terrorism on its various dimensions: financial, uh, physical, engineering, social. And on one of those panels was devoted to the social and behavioral aspects of terrorism. And it was my good fortune to be invited to participate in that panel. It was a very, very distinguished panel headed by a renowned sociologist, Niels Smeltzer, who I knew from the time that I spent at the Advanced Studies Center at Stanford. He was the director of the center, and he invited me. I was the only psychologist on the panel. Uh, the panel also included Tom Schelling, who is a Nobel Prize laureate in economics. He's very known for his work on deterrence and compellence. So it was a very important and instructive and informative year for me to serve on that panel. And we finally, before that time, I knew very little about terrorism and about aggression and violence. These were not topics that I studied. But during my tenure on the panel, we delved deeply into these issues, and we produced a document that was submitted to Congress, Making the Nation Safer, where all the different panels reported their findings. And that was the beginning. And then there was a call for centers of excellence by DHS, Department of Homeland Security, and the University of Maryland, with 70 other universities participated, including, all the most important universities in the nation. Uh, and surprisingly, nobody was more surprised than us when the winner was announced, and it was us. University of Maryland won that Center of Excellence, and the rest is history. I was a co-director of the center for a while, and it got me into interdisciplinary collaborations with criminologists, sociologists, political scientists. I was learning from their methods, learning from the way they do things. They're trying to connect what they're doing with the way I was thinking about it. Abandoned or almost abandoned the lab to go travel the world and collect data with actual terrorists in prisons and detention centers, and talking with people who dealt with them, and started publishing papers, applying for grants, and slowly I accumulated some knowledge in that topic and started teaching courses on terrorism. And as you saw, I have a network of friends, many of them who participated as guest lecturers from all over the world, dealing with different aspects of terrorism, women in terrorism, the Islam's fight against extremism, the Islam's trying to defend itself against the curse of fanaticism and fundamentalism, uh, the law aspects of terrorism, and all the different varieties of issues that come up, the current terrorism landscape, where things are going. So it's been a very rewarding experience. And of course, I tied it to my interest in psychology in general. So it started with terrorism, and then I took it back to psychology, and that was the work on the quest for significance. And now we're extending it to another yet project, the psychology of bigness and smallness, and very exciting. So it's been a very interesting and stimulating turn of events that got me to study terrorism.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're the events leading up to how you've come into the position that you're in now are just so interesting, especially because you say it's good luck. I'm sure it was partially the timing of the events at the time, but also your hard work. And I just think it's so great that you were able to take something that you had initially studied and then be able to expand it and bring it to a whole new field that, I mean, not that terrorism wasn't studied before 9/11, but obviously right after 9/11, it kind of had that big boom where everyone was realizing that we need to have policy informed to kind of understand the motivations of terrorists. But I really think people overlook the psychology of terrorism just because understanding the motivations for why people are committing these acts is so important in order to really get to the nitty-gritty of why they're doing what they're doing and how do we go about combating that if we're not able to see it from their point of view first. Which,
Yes.
yeah, exactly. Kind of that deep dive into motivation is exactly what your new book about that you co-authored with Dr. Moskalenko, The Psychology of the Extremism, is about.
Right.
What pushed you to write it? And what do you hope readers take away from it that's different from the usual takes on radicalization?
Uh, Two takes. One is that extremism, we see it as an esoteric phenomenon. We see it primarily in the realm of violent extremism, uh, another term that people use for terrorism. But I think extremism is a much deeper condition that people can experience in other domains as well. People can be extreme political activists. They can be extreme humanists, devoting their, like Mother Teresa.
Right.
They can be, extremists like Martin Luther King called himself a radical. Gandhi definitely was, but
Mhm.
so was Osama bin Laden. There are people in the sports who devote all their lives to just sports, practice, for hours on end every day, you neglect everything else. There are workaholics. There are people who embark on extreme diets. And what's interesting that it's the same psychological dynamic that at the end motivates each and every one of these extremism. It's the same motivational constellation, core dynamic, and that's what is interesting for me, because science is basically discovering the underlying principles between phenomena that on the surface appear very different from one another. What could be different, you know, what could be more different than considering the life of Mother Teresa and Osama bin Laden?
Right.
Yet, at the end of the day, there is a common dynamic. They took it in different directions. One is extremely humanistic, pro-social. Another one is much more destructive. But I think it's the same dynamic. And to me, the exciting thing was to discover that dynamic. And that dynamic, as the book explains, is when one need becomes so dominant that it suppresses everything else. And then anything that serves that need has no constraints. Anything goes. You can devote your life, you can devote the life of your family, you can abandon your career, you can just, there was absolutely no stopping, because this thing is so important that it suppresses, inhibits everything else. So that's the one thing. The second thing is the content of the motivation. We talk, okay, extreme diets, extreme sports, but I think what is people who do not study motivation very often confuse ends and means.
Right.
The means are very different. So, for example, in the case of motivation for terrorism, people identified a whole host of list of motives, perks of the afterlife. In the case of the Islamist idea of going to heaven, weddings, 72 virgins, and so on, a adoration of the leader, feminism, showing that women too can do it, a whole list of possible motives. But I think these are the means. The end, as we discovered, is this quest for significance.
Right.
The idea, and this is a fundamental motive. So, the means are very different in different cultural settings, in different countries, in different historical periods, but the human nature has not changed over the millennia. We are the same as we were, 3,000 years ago, and we can identify with stories from the Bible and so forth, historical stories, because we have the same nature, the same general structure, and that fundamental quest to matter, to be somebody, to have respect, to have dignity, is what accounts for terrorism, but also for other things. And so, the extremism in the case of terrorism is an attempt that motive that gets out of whack and becomes so dominant is to be important, to be a hero, to be a martyr, and that's what violence very often serves. So these are the two things, that it has to be a motivational imbalance, and that motivational imbalance primarily consists of the quest for significance becoming so overriding that it overshadows everything else.
Right, absolutely. And that's a phrase that's kind of been living in my head rent-free since class, the quest for significance. Can you elaborate on what that is for our listeners, and how does it fuel extremist behavior?
Well, the quest for significance, I think of it as the mother of all social motivations. This is the need to have respect, to have dignity, to be taken into account, to matter. We all have that. You and I and Elena and everybody else on the planet has it. Some people are more ambitious. They want to be more heroic, more recognized. They strive to be superstars. Other people are more modest. They do not need that much significance, but everybody needs some significance. Nobody wants to be humiliated. And it's a motivation that affects our everydays. When you say I had good news, what does it mean? It means you got a good grade, or somebody accepted your proposal, somebody said yes to you, somebody smiled to you, somebody approved of you. What does it mean having bad news? You failed on some task, you were rejected, you applied and you didn't get in. So, and it all bears on whether you are good enough, whether you mattered to somebody enough to say yes to you. So it affects, our romantic relations, our love relations, uh, our academic pursuits, our athletic pursuits, a game of tennis, anything is very, very, very much hinges upon this quest for significance, quest to matter, quest to be appreciated. But also, it affects phenomena in the macrosphere. So, for example, there are two sources of significance. One is your personal attainments, whether you did well in your career, in your professional studies, in your athletics. And the second one is the class of individuals to which you belong.
Right.
Whether you're a woman or a man, or an LGBTQ person, whether you are a white person or a person of color, whether you are of a given religion. These things also affect your significance in accordance with how these categories are appreciated in the culture. So sometimes you can be a very accomplished person, but your social identity, the category of people you belong, drags down your significance. Uh, you know, Women writers in the 19th and early 18th century and early 20th century were writing under male pseudonyms because they knew that their work will not be appreciated this way. So, your social identity is important. You can either escape it like these women did, try to hide it, or you can organize and fight for it. And it's interesting that all the social movements in history have to do with a class of people who got together and fought to be recognized. And, Black Lives Matter, for example, the feminist movement, the LGBTQ movement, you name it, civil rights movement, the French Revolution, the American Revolution, the Russian Revolution, the anti-colonialism fights of the 1950s and 1960s. These are movements that changed the history of the world, right? The anti-colonialist movement gave rise to nations like, Cyprus, like Algeria, like, many, many, many different countries because of these movements. And they all have to do with the quest for significance. So, the philosopher John Stuart Mill, a very important 19th century philosopher, once said that all social phenomena have their roots in the human nature. And this quest for significance is a case in point. It's an aspect of human nature that affects you and me today, tomorrow, yesterday, but it also creates revolutions, creates social movements, creates wars. Putin's war in Ukraine, for example, is a case in point. He wants significance for Russia. He feels that, the demise of the Soviet Union in 91 was the greatest catastrophe of the 20th century, right? And he wants to restore the significance, the kind of the Russian Empire that existed for centuries, and then the Soviet Union. So, and millions of people are dying for that. So it's interesting that it shows that psychology is really the indispensable science,
Right.
because it all starts, as John Stuart Mill emphasized, in the human nature.
Absolutely. And I think that's such an interesting concept that I think so many people overlook, that we all share that same kind of quest for wanting to feel significant in our everyday lives. And do people sometimes take that to the negative sense, and when they feel rejected, get violent or aggressive, the aggression hypothesis? I think that that's so interesting that we all share those same kind of basic human needs, and that's all something that we strive to look for in everyday life. And it really is just a matter of how that significance, especially when you face a rejection, that could be the difference between you and someone who's committing violent acts, is how you handle that rejection in your own kind of personal life. And kind of going off of that, what do you think is the biggest thing that people still get wrong about why someone joins an extremist group or a terrorist group?
Well, people always thought because what the terrorist groups are doing is so older folks, uh, that the overall hypothesis that is still quite rampant among people who are uninformed is that there is something wrong with people. There's something psychologically wrong. There is a psychopathology underlying it, you know, and trying to understand what it is. But it's not. It's not a psychopathology. It's a common dynamic that goes back to the things that all of us share, this quest for significance and the capacity for motivational imbalance. These are all things that are very functional, that serve us well. For example, the motivational imbalance serves us well in times of emergency. In times of emergency, it's very important for us to be able to channel all that we have got into this one concern and forget anything else, right? But you know, as with all human properties, they can be channeled in the wrong direction, and that's what happens with terrorism. And you know, what's particularly problematic and challenging is that violence is a very primordial and basic means to significance, and it's very easy to evoke that particular means to significance. And, you know, so for example, you see all these conflicts. I was recently consulted by a scientist from India who is trying to understand the current conflict between India and Pakistan in Kashmir. Uh, and you know, both sides are getting increasingly violent, and people are dying in the process. How to get them off that high horse? And it's very difficult because violence is such a primordial, such an inherent ways of getting significance, and leaders know it. So they know that if they want to mobilize supporters, that's the best way. And leaders, of course, want power, want support. So it's an extremely challenging thing to tell people, you know, it's at the end of the day, it's counterproductive. Millions of people are going to die. There's going to be a lot of suffering. And you're not going to get that significance because the other party is going to inflict shame on you and defeats and so on. It's very difficult to convince people of that because of that you know, inherent primordial pull of violence as a route to significance.
Yeah, and I think that's such an interesting um, kind of segue into what you said, how most people who commit these acts of violent extremism or terrorism are not mentally ill. And we know that from kind of research that's been done. And not to say that none are, but the majority are not. And I think it's so easy to dehumanize these people that are committing these acts and just write them off as they're a terrorist organization, so they must be mentally ill because why else would they be doing it? But obviously, in their own brain, they have motivations for what they're doing, and it's the quest for significance of finding that significance. And it's just the motivational imbalance of them channeling all of their energy into kind of finding that significance and resorting to violence to attain those means rather than going about it in a different way. And I think that's something that we, as kind of Americans, where we don't have as much kind of nationwide terrorism, almost in a sense, we're not at war right now, we're overlooking those things because they don't maybe necessarily affect us, and it's just easy to write it off as it's another country. It's their own kind of cultural differences and mentally ill, like anything like that. So I think it's something that's very important to understand, and in order to inform later policy regarding counterterrorism measures, I think it's so crucial to be understanding of where these people are coming from, and that's how we solve those issues. And it's fascinating about how much of this comes down to emotion and identity and not just rigid beliefs or mental illness. So, how much of a role does ideology really play compared to personal or emotional drivers in extremism?
Well, I think the ultimate driver is what you call the emotional. I call it the motivational.
Yeah,
That's the need. The need drives emotions, drive behavior only when they become needs. When they want to, they prompt you to attain something. Emotion as such doesn't mean anything. If you're sad, you're sad. It doesn't imply anything in particular. But if you want to eliminate the sadness, that's a motivation, right? So emotion crystallize as motivations. Uh, Sometimes motivations are evoked without emotion. You just want to become, or maybe you're humiliated, or maybe there's an opportunity for greatness and that need is activated. Uh, I lost track of your question.
no, you're so fine. How do you think ideology plays a role in
Yes, right, right, right,
significant?
right. Yes. So, one of the most important thing is to understand the distinction between ends and means. Uh, the important thing is that ideology is one means of attaining significance. It tells you what to do in order to attain significance. So if the ideology says there is an enemy at the gates, this enemy is treating you unfairly, is humiliating you, is ravaging you, is killing your citizen, killing your brethren, raping your women, slaughtering your children, and you've got to stand up and fight against it. If that's the ideology, that's one way. And then if you do that, you're going to be a hero, you're going to be a martyr, you're going to satisfy your need for significance. But another narrative can be, you've got to build your nation, you've got to, negotiate with the other side, you've got to, be constructive, and that's how you're going to be important. That's how you're going to serve your country. So ideology is the means. It's never the end. And sometimes people confuse the two. And, just because people believe in one kind of narrative, they are labeled as evil, and therefore, if you're evil, what do you do with evil? The only way to deal with evil is to eliminate it, to kill them all, right? That was the idea behind the global war on terror. Terror is evil, but terrorism is just one means to significance, right?
Right,
And if you can replace that means, that's the beauty of a motivational analysis. Motivational analysis is a hierarchy. There is a kind of pyramid at the apex of which there is the need, and the
right,
rest is means, and the means are replaceable. The end is irreplaceable. It's fixed. We have that need. Humans have the need for significance, period. But it doesn't have to be satisfied through violence, although very often it is. It can be replaced. And we have seen instances of deradicalization when the means of significance was taken off the table because the party was defeated or for whatever, and then they were ready to de-radicalize. We have
right,
seen in Sri Lanka in our research that you know very well of, but also in Egypt, there were terrorist organizations that disbanded, and the leaders tried to convince their followers that Islam is against violence, against suicide bombing, and all of that. And that happened after the violent means was taken off the table. So I think it's very important to understand that terrorism is replaceable uh, by other means that it's not that if you have a narrative that advocates violence, that means you're evil. You just happen to be convinced by that narrative, but you can change your mind.
right. Absolutely. I think that ties into the need network and narrative, the three ends, and
Exactly.
the Maslow's hierarchy of needs of where we all have that inherent need to feel significant, but the means can be changed of how we get there.
Exactly. Exactly.
And I think it's just so interesting that all the de-radicalization processes have been able to be facilitated when you change how you get to that means of significance. And I think that's definitely something that we all need to look at and consider, especially within ourselves and just kind of how people function and, being able to understand from a different viewpoint how people are functioning.
Exactly.
And in
Psychological
today,
literacy, I think it's so important to have people gain that self-understanding and
right,
understanding of others. I think that could regulate their personal relations, how they parent, how they behave in the family, how they behave with their spouses. I think it's really an extremely important thing to get an understanding of.
absolutely. I feel like everyone needs to take like a psychology 100 level course where they're learning the basic motivational imbalances and kind of how people function at a core level so we can all just be more understanding. I think the world would benefit from that greatly.
I think so too.
Um, and I feel like the drivers that we talked about to kind of push towards this significance can be activated in very different spaces. From your work with START and beyond, have you noticed any key differences between people who radicalize online versus in real life networks like the three Ns?
Well, I think things have changed. The radicalization online is a relatively recent phenomenon. Uh, Usually, it was pretty difficult to find people who are like-minded before the social media allowed anybody of whatever persuasion or whatever esoteric views to find other people who think exactly the same way. So
Right.
I think you know, you had to be looking very hard and very, very motivated to find people like that. Right now, it's much more accessible. So, all you have to do is flip through your channels or your surf the internet and find people like that. So I think that means that a much broader range of people with different personalities can become radicalized more easily. Whereas before, you had to be a very, very special person, look very, very hard to find people like that. Right now, it's much, much easier, which of course is, very frightening and scary. Uh,
Yeah.
Also, the internet, and Tom Friedman wrote a book several years ago, The World is Flat. And what he meant is that people are so interconnected now. And the interconnectedness breeds social comparison, and
Right.
social comparison enhances this quest for significance, because significance is a relative term. You want to be more significant than others, right? So it's a comparative term, and this constant social comparison that goes on in the social media elevates, makes more salient, makes more dominant that quest for significance. And that is another driver for why people might become more extreme, because that would allow them, to have more significance, to suppress everything else in the quest for significance and so on.
Yeah, absolutely. And that kind of sounds like you're describing echo chambers and how
Yes,
those kind of
that,
form
yes,
online. And I think that those are just so topical because so many people sometimes don't realize when they're in an echo chamber and the algorithm is just playing into what they think that they know and is never bringing in the opposing viewpoints. And it just
exactly.
gets so dangerous because your beliefs aren't being challenged and they're only being agreed with. And obviously, we know there's all kinds of misinformation online and disinformation and how people are spreading things, especially extremist networks and terrorist networks like Al Qaeda are using online platforms to radicalize people through propaganda. And it just is a very hard time because what is real and what's not is very easy to get confused, especially because these networks are kind of promoting it to seem like a community or a brotherhood or something that it's not. So I think testimonials of people that have been de-radicalized are especially important now more than ever to kind of dispel those rumors, which kind of leads into media literacy. And in an age where misinformation and rabbit holes and manipulated content, how do you think media literacy is important in preventing radicalization and extremist thinking? And where are we falling short?
Well, the problem is a very deep philosophical problem.
Mm,
That there is simply no way of knowing what the truth is.
this is true, yeah.
Scientists don't know it. It's all based on trust and belief.
Right.
It's never, evidence is in the eye of the beholder. For one person, evidence may be a pronouncement of a trusted leader. For
Right.
another person, the evidence should be the evidence of their own eyes. But these are all flawed criteria. Your eyes may deceive you. Your scientific instruments may malfunction. The person you trust, your leader, uh, your priest, your guru may be wrong.
Yeah.
Uh, so there is no way. Philosophers, postmodern philosophers have known it for many years, but now it becomes public knowledge and it's being utilized through these, fake news, deep fakes,
Yep.
all kinds of creations by AI, and it's a
Yeah.
very, very, very challenging task to understand what the truth is. It boils down to trust. It boils down who are the kind of evidence that you trust. Do you trust the New York Times? Do you trust Fox News? Do you trust the Washington Post? Do you trust your teachers? But it boils down to trust. There is no proof. It's not mathematics where things are analytically true. That's about the only truth that is incontrovertible. All the other truths are what they call synthetic. They are in the eye of the beholder. There was this funny story about the man who wanted to find out the secret of life, and he traveled to all kinds of places, and nobody could tell him what is the secret of life. And finally, he was told that there is this guru in the Himalaya mountains that lives in a cave, and this guru knows the secret of the truth. So he trekked all the way to the Himalaya mountains, and he finds this guru, and the guru has a very long beard, as gurus, looks like a guru, and he says, Guru, what is the secret of life? And the guru says, the secret of life is the fresh spring of water. And he says, is it? And the guru says, isn't it? Which shows, that even the guru wasn't sure about the truth that he had. So truth is a very challenging concept. We don't know the truth, and now we are in the age where this is manipulated by malevolent actors through bots, through deepfakes, through trolls, through all the things, and we've got to trust somebody, and of course these events make it more difficult to trust anybody because you're exposed to so much divergent information. You're barraged by multiplicity of different types of information, and you don't know who to believe. So you've got to believe in something.
Yeah, absolutely. That's kind of a concept that we touched on with Dr. Thomas Guerrieri when he came on our podcast. And he was talking about how one of the first assignments he has his students do is try to figure out how Christopher Columbus or like a historical event, or I think it was George Washington, how we knew George Washington was the first president. And he's like, but how would you know? You weren't there at the time of the event. All we have to go on is these records, and we just believe these records. So there is some kind of level of trust at a point because we just know the past is the past because of books and accounts, but who's to say that those accounts are true? Which
And
I think,
even now,
yeah,
maybe it's somebody that is disguised as president. Uh,
right,
you never know, right?
right. Who's to know? So that kind of leads me to when you're looking for things online that are true and false, how do you determine what to believe and what's real and what's not?
Well, one strategy is to use the strategy of convergent information. If different sources show the same thing, so
Right.
we have a hypothesis because we interviewed terrorist prisoners in Indonesia, and then we try to get what is underlying it all, and we replicate it in a different place and time, or we extract the psychological mechanism and we studied it in the lab, and it all converges on one thing. We have some faith in it. Of course, our faith, as in any scientific faith, is tentative and somebody can question it. But for the time being, we think we have a body of evidence that is convergent enough for us to be able to say that's what we found and that's what we believe. But all we have is belief, and scientists are known for being very critical of. There is a peer review process, and when you
Right.
submit an article, you can expect the reviewers to be very skeptical about everything that you say, sometimes overly skeptical. But that's the rigor of science, and you're never taken, very easily to publish your papers. You have to prove with a variety of evidence that what you're doing stands up. But again, these are just scientific findings, and they can be questioned in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. Kind of switching a little bit, you've mentored a generation of researchers and taught this material to undergrads. What's one lesson you hope your students carry with them about extremism or anything in general?
Well, I'm giving a speech at a conference in just 2 days, Association for Psychological Science, about the future of psychology. And my message to my students is that even though we live in the lab, we carry out research with, artificial means, artificial manipulations, questionnaires, and so forth, we must not forget that what we are doing has bearing on real world phenomena, and has bearing on larger issues, and that's the mission of the social sciences, to really bear on important world issues. It's not just to communicate with other scientists, to publish in a good journal that have high impact factor. That's very nice, but I think the important thing is to keep in mind the significance, the world significance of what social sciences are trying to do in order to improve the life on the planet, improve, for example, extremism and extreme quest for significance leads to exploitation of the environment.
Yeah.
The environment doesn't matter. You want to accumulate wealth in order to be significant, and anything that serves that purpose goes, right. So we have to understand that that's what's happening. The kind of notion of economic development where Western nations are trying to impose Western standards on other nations. To understand that this is the psychology of it is, in order to be significant, in order to dominate and take resources from. So all these conflicts that we study in the lab have real world implications. And I would like my students to never forget that. It's not, we're not living in an ivory tower of academia, communicating with one another, having very nice methods and statistics. No, I think the issues are much more encompassing, much more important, much bigger than what one might think.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it can definitely be easy to get lost in the kind of methodology of it all and just the theories and forget that it is applying to real world situations and we're the future generation. So we have influence on these upcoming policies and how
Exactly.
the world will continue to function. So leading off that, if you could snap your fingers and implement one concept of anything from our psychology of extremism class into every policymaker's brain, what would it be?
I guess understanding the need for significance, how it really makes the world turn around, and the interplay. This is the topic that I'm now taking it to. There is the need for significance, the need for bigness, but there's
Right.
also a need for smallness, uh, uh, which is the opposite. The need for significance is to be dominant, to be big, to be as important as possible. and it carries with it a lot of pressure, a lot of competition, very often violence. Uh, but to be small, sometimes you want to get away from it all. The Buddhist idea, you want to be free from obligations, not have so much pressure. And I think that the balance between these two is extremely important in human life, in international relations, uh, in every dimension of the human existence, that balance between the need to be big and the need to be small, how to balance the two, how to find a way of being big in a context that allows you also to have respite from pressure, relief from stress, just be there, just be free, unencumbered. So I think that if we understand that, and if we teach policymakers to understand themselves and others that way, that would be a very important achievement.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. Um, and then kind of last question wrapping up. This is more personal. This is heavy material. How do you stay motivated and hopeful when your work constantly deals with the darkest parts of human behavior?
Well, I think what is exciting about science is the opportunity for discovery, especially when the discovery could possibly change the way people live their lives and improve the welfare of human beings. I think that's what social sciences and humanities are striving to accomplish. And I think that motivation for discovery of something of importance is what keeps me going. And I've never been more excited about my work, and I've been at it for quite a few decades. Uh, than now. We have a big project on freedom, the psychology of freedom. We have the psychology of bigness and smallness. We have now a big paper on romantic love. So it's all issues that touch on the gist of the human experience, and the privilege to work on that with my enthusiastic students and postdocs and colleagues is just a huge blessing, and I'm very grateful for it.
Yeah, absolutely. That's amazing. I'm excited to see what comes out of all of those research projects.
So
I
am
can't-
I.
Elena, do you have any questions?
No, I think that was all pretty covered. I mean, as someone with not much of a psychology background, this is all just really fascinating, but I'm seeing the threads of how it all goes together from doing the kind of on the ground data collection on this stuff in terms of looking at extremist motivations. I think all of this ties in really well and makes a lot of sense. And I really appreciate what you said about the opportunity for discovery. It is depressing work, but someone's got to do it. And if you can channel that towards a positive outcome and making positive improvements in the world, like I think I also get a lot of satisfaction from that. So I absolutely see how that comes about. And yeah, I definitely am very interested to see what comes out next. So,
Me, yes.
yep.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't wait to hear about the psychology of freedom. So Dr. Kruglanski, do you have anything else to add that we didn't touch on?
No, it was a pleasure talking to you and having an opportunity to discuss these things.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for taking us inside the minds and motivations behind some of the most extreme behaviors out there. And that was very deep, powerful, and hopeful. I guess weirdly hopeful. If this conversation got your brain buzzing, pick up The Psychology of the Extreme. It's packed with the insight we need more of right now. The link will be in our description and it's available on Amazon. Until next time, stay sharp, question everything, and never underestimate the power of understanding. This has been Into the Oasis. Catch you soon.